Hello again, and welcome to the third podcast of my personalised view of the changing role of the quantity surveyor. I've called this episode Don't Throw the Baby Out with the Bathwater. I'll start off with a bit of a rant. Previously, I've looked at the last few decades, including the so-called golden years for the quantity surveyor, up until the dawn of the new millennium. In this podcast, I will look at the challenges facing the industry and construction professionals going forward. As someone who has always been involved in construction, education and training, I have become acutely aware of the way in which practical subjects, such as construction technology and measurement, have been put on the back burner by universities and some professional bodies, or in some cases, taken off the cooker altogether, to be replaced by more sexy topics, which, in my opinion, should be postgraduate material. In addition, the numbers of construction professionals in universities working as teachers is rapidly declining, to be replaced by career academics with little or no construction experience, but with a PhD that will gather dust on the shelf, but nevertheless impressed the interview board. If we're not careful, in a few years' time, there will be nobody capable of teaching the practical topics that are the bedrock for QSs. A few years ago, I was presenting a CPD session in Leeds on new rules of measurement to quantity surveyors. In the audience, there were two young graduates in quantity surveying from a UK university, that shall remain nameless, who admitted never having studied measurement. Is it me? A few years ago, I was fortunate to visit the New York offices of Pye Cobb Fried, the internationally renowned architectural practice responsible for, amongst other iconic structures, the Louvre Pyramid in Paris and the Bank of China building in Hong Kong. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking it was a practice full of concept men dreaming of grandiose but highly impractical schemes that would never see the light of day. But what really impressed me was that the practice had a partner in charge of technology and construction, and the way in which the practice had a practical buildability approach to building design. There, rant over. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, the dawn of the new millennium. The early 2000s saw the back of Sir John Egan, but not the search for greater value for money. The Private Finance Initiative, or PFI, was, together with Design and Build, the only procurement game in town for the public sector, with new deals being signed off at a record rate. I'm not on the side of people who criticise the PFI. It wasn't perfect, but it did deliver many new hospitals and schools and had the effect of concentrating people's minds on the long-term costs of owning complex buildings, as consortia were responsible in some cases for the life cycle costs of a PFI project for up to 35 years. During this period, surveying practices involved in PFI projects developed their own in-house costs and use teams and expertise. One of the ways suggested by Latham in 1994 in his report was partnering. It had some success in the North Sea oil and gas sector, but in construction, after initial enthusiasm, it has not been the silver bullet predicted by many. However, on the plus side, there does seem to be a greater early supply chain involvement, resulting in less of them and us, and more of the trust called for by Latham. 2000 was also the age of .com. For every QS, the must-have item on the Christmas list was, yes, you've guessed it, a website. However, Google wasn't widely available until 2004. Most internet connections depended upon a dial-up modem, and email was in its infancy. Can it really only be 20 years ago? Nevertheless, these electronic aids with the first sign of the digital revolution to sweep over society, construction and its professions in the years to come. One of the UK's biggest challenges is its inability to embrace any change quickly. There is an ingrained culture whereby it is slow to adapt and change, whether through personal or organisational resistance. The reasons are varied, however. Typically they include time constraints, competing demands and agendas, coupled with the pathetically low operating and profit margins that make investment into training or digital infrastructure a difficult decision. A quantity surveyor entering the industry today can expect a 50-year plus career. However, unlike a QS in the golden age, the changes encountered in the future will mean their entry training is unlikely to provide all the skills needed to see them through to retirement. The pace of change has never been so rapid and so relentless, and the industry and the quantity surveyor must embrace the changes, making the need for lifelong learning and CPD even more vital. In my opinion, the challenges facing the QS will come from digital technology and sustainability. Data and technology. The pace of change during the coming years will be much faster than the QS has experienced in the golden age discussed in the first podcast, driven by advanced technology. This expansion is expected to exceed growth in both manufacturing and services, and some have called this the fourth industrial revolution. The construction industry generates large volumes of data, but much of it is currently unused. There is scope to make construction projects more efficient, greener, and building safer by harnessing the power of data and making it work for us. BIM, a good idea, but badly sold. Ask people in construction what they think of when they think of BIM. Probably the answers will involve substantial investment in software and loads of specialist staff, and a perception that it is only for large contractors and large projects. Unfortunately, although this may be so in some cases, the main drivers of BIM are cooperation and information sharing, traditionally lacking in construction. And to this extent, BIM's potential seems to have been bypassed by the majority of construction. The move by governments to make the use of BIM on public sector projects mandatory by 2016 was another Ethel the Aardvark moment for the QS, as it was confidently predicted that BIM's ability to produce quantity takeoffs would once more make the QS redundant. There is no doubt that BIM can produce generic quantity takeoffs more quickly than traditional techniques, although other systems, such as digitizers, are capable of producing quantities quickly and efficiently. However, the key skill for quantity surveyors working with BIM is to interpret the BIM models, just as in the past they have interpreted drawings. BIM models can generate quantities quickly. What they can't do so effectively, well, just yet anyway, is to present the quantities in a format that is of wider use to the industry. The material quantities derived from the BIM model must be verified and checked, currently a task requiring human involvement. As time and the BIM adoption progresses, the full potential is yet to be realised and utilised in day-to-day practice. For the QS, whilst many are educated in BIM, be it the protocols, the software itself, or the legislation and standards, full integration with costing is not yet the norm. The time frame for mandatory BIM has now been extended. And remember, BIM was never just about software, but more about improved collaboration, improved efficiency, and risk reduction. One of the major challenges with BIM implementation has been its interoperability and ability to exchange and manipulate data freely between disciplines and indeed even departments within one company, due to differing software and IT infrastructure, with varying software licenses and requirements. One size doesn't fit all. Robotics. In 2023, construction is still a process that in the main depends on manual operations. It has to change. Robotics and robotic automation are being utilized in both site operations and within off-site manufacturing in a bid to enable safer working practices and precision construction. Robotic automated activities relating to the cutting of materials, reducing waste and extracting greater value for money are currently common. And activities such as carrying heavy loads, self-driving vehicles, hazardous activities such as robotic welding and site security patrols are becoming commonplace within the sector today. Augmented reality and virtual reality. These technologies are becoming more commonplace, with the ability to utilize them to enable clients and stakeholders to visualize their projects and to come to greater design certainty, thereby reducing design changes and variations. Equally, these technologies are being utilized to aid in the construction operations themselves, particularly with benefits associated with health and safety. And now to the second big challenge: sustainability. In the early 2000s, alarm bells started to ring over the concern for global warming. Whenever carbon emissions are discussed, it is usually the travel industry, and in particular aviation, that are branded as the bad guys. Whereas if you look at figures for construction, emissions, taking into account material manufacture and occupancy, account for 35% plus of all carbon emissions. Greenhouse gases are emitted at every stage of the construction and use cycle, from the manufacture of materials through construction and maintenance and eventual demolition. Emissions from the built environment must be reduced if the UK is to meet its net zero target by 2050. In a previous podcast, I mentioned the vast number of reports that have been produced over the years focusing on the inefficiencies of UK construction. The latest report, the UK Government's Construction Strategy for 2025, calls for a 33% reduction in initial and whole life costs and a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases in the built environment. Current feedback seems to suggest the construction industry is failing big time and is never going to meet these targets. In addition, you have to ask yourself, how did the civil servants who drew up this report get their figures, or are they just arbitrary percentages, a bit like the figures in the Latham report? Of course, one of the major concerns with these targets is that approximately 98% of building stock is existing, and therefore one of the biggest challenges for the construction industry is how to deal with this. Nevertheless, today's clients are asking quantity surveyors to estimate embodied carbon of different design solutions, and although this sounds like a complicated process, with the right information it is possible to make realistic estimates of an entire structure at the earliest stage in the design. For more information on this, have a look at the International Construction Measurement Standards, available as a free download. The circular economy. Now, I don't want to be patronising, but, and when someone says this, you know they're going to be, you may have heard of the term circular economy. The concept is a simple one. Vast amounts of materials are wasted during the construction process, Incredibly, an estimated 25 million tonnes of construction waste end up in landfill without any form of recovery or reuse. A circular economy approach advocates reusing materials and designing buildings with the aim of adapting and disassembling parts of them for reuse. How can the QS become involved in the circular economy? Well, here are a couple of ideas. Contract documentation should include a requirement for the use of reused materials. The project reclamation target should be built into all contracts, allowing the contractors the flexibility to meet the targets as they see fit. There is an emerging market in recycled and reclaimed materials. However, trying to source large quantities of these materials is problematic, and for the time being, at least, will remain a minority market, but watch this space. Conclusion. So, in our rush to enter what Harold Wilson in 1964 called the white heat of the technological revolution, let's not abandon our traditional skills such as measurement. In order to attract new talent and retain current talent, we need to evolve and embrace new ways of working. Whilst there are pockets of excellent practice within the sector, digital construction is undoubtedly the present disruptor. The wider construction industry needs to resolve poor productivity, inefficiencies, increase accuracy of our processes, and to provide reliable real-time data to clients and project stakeholders. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Going forward, we plan to release a podcast on a regular basis on current hot topics with invited guests. One of the topics on the list is, which is better, to take a full-time degree course in quantity surveying or an apprenticeship?